BYU could go unbeaten in the regular season and all would be smooth and normal, or chaos could ensue. And I don't think it'll be this Saturday.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth, whatever that may be. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with that big return. What's next for Texas A&M? All is not lost in College Station. In fact, I personally am very happy that South Carolina won over the weekend, and you're going to be as well. And Boise State jumping the Big 12 champion is not as crazy as you'd think. And let's start with the Big 12 conference. So BYU was off last week, and they, along with Colorado, among the biggest winners, especially Colorado, in the whole college football world, because they got a lot of help. It got a lot easier. BYU doesn't have to go undefeated to make the Big 12 championship game, but if they do, they will be the only team overall or in Big 12 play that will be unbeaten. So they'll have a big fat target on their back. But when I look at what BYU's schedule has coming down the stretch, and I've been asking this question for a long time, and BYU fans, bear with me. I'm not changing our arrangement here, but what I am saying is that this week's game against Utah is not the most likely game they'll lose. It's just not. It's Arizona State. Because Kenny Dillingham has got the boys cooking. I thought ASU would lose this weekend. They were on the road. Oklahoma State had been playing a little bit better, felt like they were due for a win. Nope. Arizona State, weather conditions and all, blew them out. So BYU still has to go to Utah and to Arizona State. If they win both those games, I have a high level of confidence they will win their other two football games. I don't know that they're winning both of those football games. And look, I'm Captain Anti-BYU. I am the poster child in the YouTube BYU community for this guy doesn't believe in BYU. And I believe in BYU's ability to win the Big 12. I just don't know if they're going on the road to beat both Utah and Arizona State. And the reason I start my show with this today is I think most people look at BYU and say, well, you could always lose the Holy War. You could always lose. It's in Salt Lake City. It's going to be a hostile environment. And it is. I can't wait to watch it this weekend. It's going to be completely and utterly spectacular, as always. No matter how good those teams are, it's a feisty environment. It's a great crowd, and it's usually a good football game. And BYU's favored by just under 5 points. That's probably about right because they've been, competent this year? And Utah's offense, inept, not good. Not good. They've even lost on their home field. Didn't think that would happen no matter who was at quarterback. Well, Isaac Wilson has not been that sort of guy. But Arizona State is just playing good football. And I thought it was ridiculous before the year when the Big 12 media picked them to finish last in the conference. I went, whoa. I didn't say that about BYU, of course, but I said that about ASU and thought, whoa, this is not the worst team in this conference. That's obviously Arizona. Oh, wait, well, no, I didn't say that exactly either. The Chaos Conference is just, it's wonderful. It's beautiful. And I'm not going to have a conversation about the national title potential of any of these teams right now, because we don't need to bring the mood down on what is just a beautifully exciting product. Because Drake Tolanai of Locked On Big 12 and Joel Klatt as well had the same Big 12 championship game. Utah, Kansas, boom. Neither one of those teams is any good. They're not even close. By the way, Kansas is only a 3-point underdog against Iowa State this week. Does that surprise you? Does that surprise you? It doesn't surprise me, but it might surprise a lot of you out there. But anyway, I bring this back to BYU. So they are off a bye, and they will be on the road this week against Utah. And I'm not going to make a prediction about that particular football game. BYU fans wouldn't really like if I did. But for BYU, their toughest remaining game is Arizona State. I could see them losing either of those particular football games, but Arizona State is far more likely. That's the game you need to circle. Everyone's going to watch this week because it's going to be great, but BYU's a more complete football team. But most of you haven't watched Arizona State this year, and I'm going to talk later in today's show about the big picture ramifications for BYU not going undefeated, because if they go 12-0, and they win the Big 12 championship game, of course, they're going to have a first round bye in the playoff. But everything gets sticky, and I'll just leave you with this particular thought before I talk about the other league chasing the Big 10 and the SEC. The Big 12 has been the chaos conference. We're entering the month of November. Do you think there is going to be normal football play? Do you think the standard chalk outcomes, not the rock chalk variety, just the chalk outcomes where the favorites win all the time, is going to suddenly pick up in November? Because it took a break from doing that, as if it was ever, really doing that all the time anyway. Took a break from that last week in a chaotic Saturday across college football, particularly in the Big 12, where Iowa State lost and Kansas State lost to teams that they just shouldn't have lost to, but alas, they did. Do you think we're done seeing that? Do you think we're done? Maybe BYU will continue holding on. But between BYU, Iowa State, Colorado, Kansas State, someone's going to lose a game in November that you don't think they should lose right now. And that game against Arizona State, I'd circle it. Kenny Dillingham's got the boys playing really good football there in Tempe. And by the way, it's in Tempe. Won't be a cold weather game, but it should be a pretty good environment. So keep your eye on that. Here's another thing you need to keep your eye on. The ACC is seeing Miami separate because of its undefeated record. So Clemson picks up its second loss at home against Louisville. By the way, they lost 33-21. If you watch that game, you know it was actually a lot worse than that. Horrific outing for Clemson. I think a worse performance than their week 1 game against Georgia, and they lost that one 34-3. This was at home. You'd been rolling off a bye. Louisville had played 7 straight games going into that one, or that was the 7th straight. And yeah, they housed you. They housed you. So Clemson no longer controls its own destiny to get to the ACC championship game. SMU does. Are you prepared for the possibility of SMU to be in the college football playoff? I hope you are. I hope you are. You probably didn't have BYU in the playoff on your bingo card before the season. I certainly didn't. You probably didn't have SMU in there. You probably thought, well, they could be all right. They'll be a fun team. Maybe they're pretty good. Well, they haven't lost an ACC game yet. Their schedule coming down the home stretch here in November, incredibly manageable. If they meet Miami in the ACC championship game, you could see SMU getting a first round bye. This team was playing in the American Athletic Conference last year, and Rhett Lashley would probably be heavily considered as the coach of the year in the ACC. Mario Cristobal would get votes as well, but if Rhett Lashley beats him in the conference title game, it'd be hard to not pick Lashley in that particular spot. SMU looked shaky earlier this year. They have stabilized. They're playing really good football. They trounced Pitt. I thought Pitt would win. Fool that I am, of course. It was an off week for the picks, all right? The picks, I didn't go over, but it wasn't a very good percentage. I'm not bragging about it, let's just say. But SMU is a team that can legitimately control its own path to get into the college football playoff. The Pony Express is riding hot, boys. It is riding hot. Just the way those donors drew it up. They couldn't be having a much better first season right now. It's not done. They have to get through November chaos. They have to survive that. But they could be meeting Miami in the ACC championship game. And frankly, if both of those teams have 11 wins and SMU's lone loss is to BYU, who's pushing to win the Big 12 right now, I got to tell you, SMU is probably an at-large team. And I guarantee you didn't think that was possible before the year. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Texas A&M loses. I'm so glad they did. I seriously could not be happier. I don't hate Texas A&M. This is not an anti-Texas A&M take. I'll tell you what I'm trying to convey. Coming up next. Right after we talk about 5-Hour Energy, because look, sometimes this time of year, I'm busy. I've got play-by-play broadcasts. I've got podcasts to do, and I need a little juice. And 5-Hour Energy, boy, that is a good, great tasting pick-me-up. 5-Hour Energy knows that being a passionate football fan isn't just a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates. It's not just a hobby. It is a way of life. I'm so juiced up as if I've just had a 5-Hour Energy, I can't even get the copy right, and it's right in front of my face. But They've created the Stand the Fan 5-hour energy shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like you or me or anybody else out there that you know that needs a little bit of extra energy. 5-hour energy knows no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of, you guessed it, energy. And they give you just that because you're going to need a little bit of extra juice because it's going to get cold at football games here in the month of November, and 5-hour energy will keep you going and keep you protecting the loudness of all these home stadiums. It's going to be important. It's going to be important everywhere you look all throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5-hour energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. I could not be happier that South Carolina won that football game against Texas A&M. Not because I dislike Texas A&M for any particular reason. Quite the contrary, as a matter of fact. We'll see if Aggie fans view it that way. But the reason I'm happy South Carolina won is twofold. Number one, Shane Beamer and company deserve to win that LSU game from earlier this season, and their fans deserve to have the opportunity to rush the field, and they got that opportunity. So that's reason number one. But reason number two is Texas A&M is now on thin ice. They've got 2 losses on the year since they lost to Notre Dame back in week 1, and they've got the 1 SEC loss to South Carolina, and there's a smorgasbord of SEC teams, 8 of whom are ranked in the top 25, by the way, 7 in the top 20. Just in case. Now, that's the AP. College football playoff rankings come out on Tuesday, but how different can they really be? 2 spots? 3 spots at the most. They tend to look pretty darn similar. They're not identical, but they're pretty darn similar. But Texas A&M is on thin ice to both make the college football playoff with their second loss and make the SEC championship game. Here's the good news. Their next contest is the good old SEC cupcake, which is an abomination to the sport and needs to be abolished, but it is what we have right now. Shield takes the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. One day, Texas A&M will have another SEC game here. Instead, they get a tune-up, and then they get a de facto tune-up when they play Auburn. Now, that game is at Jordan-Hare, and did Auburn deserve that shot? Yeah, 100% they did. They just lost to Vanderbilt on their home field as a 7-point favorite, and they can't move the football. Texas A&M, quarterback woes included, much better football team than Auburn. So, if New Mexico State, look at what Auburn does to the mind. If Texas A&M, it was the maroon contrast. That's how you get that slip of the tongue in there. Diego Pavia, legend. If Texas A&M is able to beat a cupcake game and win against bye week and beat Auburn as well, do you understand what is going to be on the line the last week of the regular season? Because, oh my goodness, they host Texas. Could Texas lose between now and then? Technically, they play Florida this week, who's been playing better. They go at Arkansas. They host Kentucky, who's pulled an upset this season. So maybe Texas will be the team that ruins my dream scenario as a college football fan, which is November 30th at Kyle Field. I want Texas against Texas A&M, the first ever time they will have matched up as SEC opponents, and I want there to be a conference championship game and or a playoff berth on the line. Because if Texas, and heck, Texas can't lose again because then they'd have a second SEC loss and a 2-loss SEC team could get into the SEC title game. However, here's the interesting thing. If Texas does lose between now and then, let's say they were to go down this week against Florida. And look, it's possible. Or maybe they lose at Arkansas, who's, like South Carolina, also a pretty good team. And that game is on the road in Fayetteville. So let's say they beat Florida and they were to lose to Arkansas. Texas would then be knocked down from the number 5 team in the country to around the number 12 team in the country. They'd get a little bit of that reputation back, but not much if they beat Kentucky at home. And then you would have a 9-2 Texas with a pair of SEC losses, and you would have potentially, ideally, a 9-2 Texas A&M team. For those that don't understand the nature of this particular rivalry, when you think about college football's best rivalry games, this one should be included. It hasn't been because Texas A&M left the Big 12 long ago, so these teams haven't played very much. But when you think about the best rivalries in college football, where does your mind go? I'll tell you where mine goes. Alabama, Auburn, Iron Bowl. What do those fan bases think about each other? They don't like each other very much. They do not like each other very much. Ohio State, Michigan. What do those fan bases think about each other? They don't like each other very much. In fact, there is legitimate disdain, unbridled hatred at times for those fan bases. That level, Oklahoma, Texas, also one of the best rivalries in the sport. I did not name every rivalry. Those are just some of the big ones that pop into my head. But Texas A&M, the level of just pure dislike, disdain, natural aggression that is felt between these two fan bases is worthy of being put on the same pedestal as those other rivalry games that I just described. The reason that it's not, and it might not have popped into your head when I said, hey, why don't you think about the best rivalries in the sport, is they don't play very often. Well, now they can. And if I am Greg Sankey, I'm going to watch this game in the last week of the regular season at College Station and ensure, and I believe this is the case, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, these teams need to play every year. This needs to be the most sacred and protected rivalry for Texas along with Oklahoma. Those games need to happen every year because those college football fans outside of Norman, Austin, and College Station just want to sit back and enjoy it. They just want to see the fireworks. Like the Joker in The Dark Knight, we're going to miss the fireworks. Well, don't let us miss the fireworks. Don't. Now that has a villain, that has a pro-villain lean to it in there. I was rooting for Batman. I just think the Joker's kind of cool. Just want to make that very, very clear. Anyway, that game could have playoff and conference title ramifications, and it should. It should. Now, Texas is going to be a far more battle-tested at that time, but Texas A&M will be far more rested because they'll have had a bye week, they'll have had a bye game, and then they'll have had Auburn. And that's just not as tough as a schedule as hosting Florida, going at Arkansas, and hosting Kentucky. So that game hasn't had its moment in the sun just yet, but if you want to catapult it into a different stratosphere of how we view rivalry games in college football, that game could have the opportunity to do it. That game could absolutely have that chance. So that's why I'm glad Texas A&M lost, because I want it to be the thinnest of ice for both teams, because I'm still holding on to the regular season as much as I can. In the 4-team era, remember, Texas A&M would be out of the playoff already, but we have the 12 team, so they can still do that, and some people view that as a positive. That's fine. I'm not here to hash out that particular argument. What I am here to say is you will love watching Texas A&M as much as you love watching Alabama, Auburn, or Ohio State, Michigan, or Oregon, Washington, or name the rivalry, wherever it is. Duke, North Carolina in basketball back in the day. That's a rivalry that I enjoy watching quite a bit. Doesn't feel the same. You know, Duke, North Carolina, Yankees, Red Sox, they don't feel the same like they used to when I was a wee lad watching sports. So anytime I see an opportunity for a rivalry game to really have the ability to encapsulate what makes rivalries fun and exciting and more interesting to watch, and why college rivalries are far better than anything they've got in the pros. Yeah, Texas A&M, you've got all the ingredients there. So I hope Texas and Texas A&M win the rest of their games until they meet, and then let's cook. Let's absolutely cook. And if Texas wants to throw a loss in there to make it even more interesting, hey, I wouldn't be opposed. But either way, Texas A&M will be playing for its life in that game against Texas, and they better figure out how to throw the football, because the second half against South Carolina, yikes. That Texas defensive line is really good too. I don't know that it's on South Carolina's level, but it's in that same sort of category. You better figure that out. That's priority number one for Mike Elko and company. So it's not over for Texas A&M, but what comes next could be really, really great for college football. Let me know your thoughts in YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. I have something to propose to you. It's going to sound ludicrous. It's going to sound insane, not the rapper, just the adjective. It's going to sound crazy, but what if the Big 12 champion doesn't get a first round bye? Well, that's entirely possible. That's coming up next. First, this episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. That's America's number one sportsbook. They're not number 2. They're not number 3. They're not number 4. No, they are number 1. If the College Football Playoff Committee put out a playoff bracket of sportsbooks, yeah, FanDuel would be the number 1 seed. They'd get a bye straight to the championship game because they're so great. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Boise State's just clowning kids in the Mountain West. And I'm going to throw a chaos scenario at you that just isn't out of the realm of possibility in any way, shape, or form. Tell me, right now, how many Big 12 teams do you think are ranked ahead of Boise State? How many? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Up, time's up. It's 1. It's 1 team. And that one team is BYU. So every other Big 12 team that's ranked, Iowa State and Colorado and Kansas State, yeah, they're all behind Boise State right now. Recall the playoff criteria. The 5 highest ranked conference champions shall be automatically put into the playoff, with the 4 highest ranked conference champions receiving byes. That is not conference specific language. And I have spoken about it in the past as, yeah, the Power 4 conferences are going to get byes. Because this scenario doesn't seem very likely to happen. It's happening in real time. We're not there yet, okay? We're about 3 steps along the way of a 5-step plan. And you can't assume you're going to have the next 2. Just because you have hit a drive into the fairway and a second shot that stays out of the water doesn't mean you're going to automatically put it on the green and 2-putt for par. You still have to hit the ball onto the green, or at least in this particular metaphor, if you went 1 for 1, you have hit the ball on the green, you have to 2-putt for par. Well, you're still about 35 feet away, and you can 3-putt from that range. It's really easy to do. I do it all the time, let me tell you. I'm a master at hitting the green and not making birdie. That is my chef's kiss specialty on the golf course. So Boise State is currently ranked 12th in the country. Now you might say, well, Spencer, they won't pick up, the high quality win that someone will get in the Big 12 championship game. I'm going to remind you, the next closest Big 12 team is currently ranked 17th. The AP voters are not the College Football Playoff Committee. They might feel very differently. How far up do you think they can put Iowa State? And how likely do you think it is that the Big 12 champion is not going to lose a single game the rest of the year? Now, if BYU does that, yep, they get the bye, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But the history of college football will tell you that those who are deciding the rankings, they don't really like punishing teams for winning. At least not often. They don't always reward teams enough for winning, but they don't really like punishing them for winning. And then they have these preconceived notions. And the notion they've got about the Big 12, based on what I'm seeing here, and again, so that you can just avoid typing the YouTube comment, Playoff Committee, AP voters, these are 2 different groups of people. They are very like-minded. They are very, very like-minded. There's not going to be more than maybe 2 spots of separation for a given team in the college football playoff on Tuesday compared to what you see in the AP poll right here, right now. So Boise State's sitting there at 12. Now, do they have a particularly hard schedule ahead? No, they do not. But if BYU loses a game to Utah or Arizona State, as I talked about earlier in today's show, as being 100% possible, and I think anybody would freely admit that's being honest that, yeah, BYU could lose either of those football games. I think ASU is certainly much tougher. If they were to do that, do you think the playoff committee is going to look at the Big 12 and say, well, the Big 12 is actually really, really good? the Big 12 is actually a lot better than we thought? Or do you think they're going to say, that loss is very punitive. You can't have that. That's going to drop you way, way down. I can guarantee you, if BYU loses to Utah this week on the road, who's 4-4, unranked, and has not been very good for the most part this season, they will be ranked lower than Boise State. And then someone will have to put together a conference championship resume that gets them above Boise State, who do not have a tough schedule remaining. Admittedly, that is true. They've got Oregon State on there, but the Beavs are about to recruit you and myself to play defensive line. They're trying to get healthy this week, but no one's touching Boise State. They're playing in the Mountain West Championship game. That's a lock. They're -2. I didn't even look to see what the latest odds are for them to win the Mountain West because, well, you're not going to get very good odds over there. Mountain West Conference Champion, I'm going to guess this right now. I promise I have not looked this up. I bet you it's -275. Oh, nope, they're -350. Boise State is -350 to win the Mountain West Championship game. And who they face will be either UNLV or Colorado State, depending on how things go. But Boise State's next 4 games are Nevada, at San Jose State, at Wyoming, hosting Oregon State. None of those teams are touching Boise State. If you watched them last week, I know most people didn't, which is why I come on here and talk about it, because I watch the Broncos all the time. Ashton Jeanty didn't really get going against San Diego State until later in the game. Didn't have his best, most explosive or efficient game, but they still rolled. Boise State scores in Mountain West play go like this: 62-30, 28-7, 29-24 over a good UNLV team that's got multiple Power 4 wins this season. That was on the road, by the way. And 56-24. They're not getting touched. And might I remind you that the more that Oregon continues to dominate teams in the Big Ten and establish themselves firmly as the number 1 team in the country, the better that Boise State's loss at Oregon by 3 points continues to look. I've talked about this with Texas A&M before. They're big Notre Dame fans in College Station. The more Notre Dame wins, the more Texas A&M has a stronger resume. Well, if Oregon continues to look like the number 1 team, and the AP voters deem them the unanimous number 1 team in college football this week, the more Boise State's resume looks really impressive because you've got to win against a ranked Washington State team at the moment, number 1. And number 2, you've got a 3-point road loss to Oregon. You are playing like a team worthy of being in the college football playoff in the way that people who advocated for the expanded playoff have long discussed. That, hey, these teams can get to that sort of level. Well, Boise State looks like that team right now. And Ashton Jeanty's really good, but they are more than just Ashton Jeanty. Maddox Madsen has been starting to get things going in the passing game. Chris Camper is a really solid wide receiver, and Dirk Cutter, the offense coordinator, is really good. Their defense is playing well enough. I think they can play better than what they have in the last couple of weeks. But overall, Boise's just a good team, and they are better than everybody else in the Mountain West. And so unless they were to lose in the conference championship game, they're going to be in the playoff. That's not a question. The question is, could they be ranked ahead of the Big 12 champion? And the answer is yes. The answer is absolutely yes. Let me throw this scenario at you. Let's say BYU loses to Arizona State in a couple weeks, but they get to the Big 12 championship game. They're 11-1, and let's say they're playing Colorado, for instance, if Colorado can get by Texas Tech this week. Or let's say they're playing Iowa State or Kansas State or literally anyone. Haven't we seen in the Big 12 that anyone can beat anyone? Haven't we already demonstrated that? So what if BYU gets in at 11-1 and they're playing a 10-2 Big 12 team, and that 10-2 team beats the 11-1 BYU team? BYU's probably still in the playoff. But is the Big 12 champion one of the 5 highest ranked conference champions in all of college football? I don't think they would be. I think that would be Boise State. So this is a chaos scenario that dawned on me as I saw Boise State ranked 12th in the AP rankings, and I'll be watching the playoff committee's rankings very closely, as will everybody on Tuesday. But I'm just telling you, this is entirely possible. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not predicting it to happen. I'm just putting it in your mind so that if it does transpire, thanks to a chaotic month of November and the first week of December with the conference championship games, you aren't surprised. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.